Still don't know about this lower bitrate thing. But we are live on YouTube and Kick. Hello, my fellow risers. So I'm just yeah, I gotta figure something out still. But it's just to see what the stream looks like in. Oh, great. That's good. Hello. Okay, great. You see there's a Kick comment. Oh, great. And I see the hello comment as well. Alright. So that's good. And then I really want to see it. How do I see it like horizontal? I have no idea what that's gonna look like. How do I see it horizontal? Because I guess it streams vertical to any phone. Unless like, let's see. Uh, bu- 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 Yeah, I don't know, bro. Oh, oh, that's not gonna be it. All right, well, we'll see. We'll see. And then I have no idea what it's gonna look like on Kick. That's all right. Let's just get into it. Um, but yeah, I am curious about. Let's see. What does it look like when horizontal? Okay, great. Oh. Right. Okay, so we're doing Losing Ourselves. Last night had a great trip, um, and was able to reflect on this stuff. And gosh, it's just so valuable when you can see, it's just so valuable to be able to see yourself as a person rather than a self. So, enormous thanks um, to the author Jay Garfield, as well as to my friend. Here we go. I've got it horizontal. So, hello, Om, and that's exactly what I was just about to say. Thank you too. All right. Well, the chat messages aren't super legible, but that's actually I think that's okay, bro. And then now why is this horizontal? But and then I can switch to the vertical. That's great. All right, everything looks good enough. Let's do it. So last night's trip, yeah, just really great. I guess clarity or integration of the ideas. Um, yeah, 10 out of 10 for sure. And so thank you, Om, for your visits and for your comments. Oh, fudge. All right, but anyway, let's get into it. I recorded some stuff while I was able to enjoy the effects, but now it's just me. So we're gonna just jump into it. Um, One more thing is that today we're doing affirmation posters, my partner and I, and so that's great. I was able to think about some things that I want to remind myself of during this trip, and this chapter is about affirmation, so everything is great. And hello, Om. Nice to see you again. Okay, chapter 8, affirmation. Oh, quick review, right? Quick review. So, losing ourselves, learning to live without a self. You know what? Let me give you one example as well. So just this morning, so my partner said to me, like I asked her how she was doing, and she wanted to report on her trip, and she said, I didn't experience ego dissolution, but it was a good trip. I was noticing my thoughts. Um, And okay, very good. And maybe if you try vertical, I'm wondering whether, but see your device. But anyway, so my partner Sarah, she says this, and that struck me because I was, I focused on the fact, or what was loudest to me was the fact that the first thing that she said was basically like, oh, I failed to achieve ego dissolution. This expectation was, not fulfilled. Um, and I want to be like, but let's focus on the fact that you had a good trip, that you were noticing your thoughts. Those are all great things. Those are all wins. The main thing is not that you didn't have the trip of all trips. And previously, when after a trip, she has reported, I didn't have any major breakthroughs. And so I go to ChatGPT and I'm like, because we're doing these affirmation posters, we want to remind ourselves, have little phrases to trigger the right psychological activity. We want to find some good slappers. Slap is my word for trigger, a mechanism, a mental state, whatever. So we have to find some good slappers. And so I go to ChatGPT to ask for a slapper that would help someone who sort of focuses on the distance from perfect rather than the distance from before, the distance from the beginning, the distance from nothing. And after I've, said, oh yeah, she said, I didn't experience ego dissolution. How can I help this woman focus on like the good things? After I say this, ChatGPT responds, here's some things, and I realize, oh wait a minute, I'm doing that exact same thing. I am focusing on that first thing that she said rather than the other two things that she said. But I had a good trip. I noticed my thoughts, and there was this affirmative nod, right? Rather than this like disappointed, tucked corner. I didn't have the trip that I think I'm supposed to have. And so I realized this. I say to ChatGPT, wait a minute. I'm doing the same thing I'm lamenting. And then I rephrase it in a way that felt much better and I think is more useful. I said, well, actually, what we can say is errors from a few minutes. The psychophysical processes that were instantiating that role, that were playing that role a few minutes ago, were a similar process to the process that in that bag of psychophysical processes called Sarah, that process that produced that first clause. I didn't experience ego dissolution. But now this is instantiated by a more meta, a noticing, who's able to and feels comfortable being critical of the errors from just a few minutes ago, is now noticing this, you can say hypocrisy, or let's say something more compassionate, something more forgiving, is noticing this similarity between the process that instantiated Eris a few minutes ago and the process that instantiated Sarah a few minutes before that. So there's a lot of freedom and it feels a lot lighter when you are interacting with past mental activity, behavioral output that came from the same body, but as seeing it as other agents pulling the strings than the current agent that's evaluating. And also that's accurate. Okay? It is not the same singular self that produced that sentence about, or that lamentation that also produced the observation of the error of the lamentation, or that the lamentation was too targeted at Sarah rather than also at Eris, or at, at the specific processes that instantiated Eris in the given moment, the moment we're talking about. So, and it's accurate because every single thought, every event, decision, interpretation, feeling, and so on can be attributed to a different mechanism or permutation of mechanisms. Okay? So, I mean, a thought, if it's the same mechanisms, it's the same thought. Let's put it that way. Or, well, not just if it's the same mechanism, but it's the same activity of, if it's the same, like, I just mean activity as in firing rate, like, of the neurons. There aren't like different kinds of activity, they're just different levels of activity. So if it's the same level of activity of the same mechanisms, then it is the same mental state, it is the same thought. I think that that's a fair, or at least a useful assertion. And I think it's empirically, maybe not demonstrated, but reasonable, justified, given, what we know. And so lean into that, frame it that way rather than I am doubting myself. No, I, as in psychophysical process X, is evaluating, is questioning, is trying an alternative approach to, psychophysical process W from a few moments ago. All right? Okay, awesome. So now let's read chapter 8, Affirmation, Becoming and Being a Person Among Persons. All right, so the Bhagavad Gita offers profound insights into the wisdom of detaching oneself from expectations, as these are often a source of unhappiness. Absolutely. And what I was just really appreciating yesterday is I need to expose myself. I need to get more intimate with the teachings of, well, India, really, the Buddhist and the Hindu teachings. It's just so amazing. And this is another thing from last night. I'm just so amazed by the things that those psychophysical processes came up with. Of course, acknowledging that anything that left those mouths, left those pens, didn't initiate in the holders of those pens, in the runners of those mouths. But that we're all these just channels through which things are passing. That's a really good narrative to use. Obviously, like, this is everything I'm saying, thinking, doing, and so on is happening here. Okay? But there are still some really useful narratives that deny this, that this can use. Right? Because when this thinks of itself as just cells, there can be disadvantages, like feeling powerless, like feeling limited, just because of how this thing thinks about cells and material in general. But when this thing thinks of itself as instead a spirit or a channel, in certain contexts, it's just incredibly freeing, and this thing runs differently, bro. I mean, this isn't one thing, of course. This is a mass of so many things. And when it's not clinging to a narrative that I am one organ, one brain, one subject, or one object, then I guess it's like the way you could see it is that there are agents that are like, oh, so can I disagree with these other agents? Oh, I can? Okay, cool. Boom. Here's my opposing point of view. And so that's kind of what was happening last night is that I was just experiencing this conversation, this interaction of agents. And they weren't all trying to cling to one story, that they all had to, toe the same line. What am I trying to say? I've tried to say this like 3 or 4 times this morning. They're not trying to, tout the company motto. Let's say that. Um, yeah. So anyway, we have so much more to learn, and so much more to learn from the different thinkers uh, around the world and throughout time. So very exciting. Very good. Excellent. All right. So I'll do chapter 8 and then we'll chat, Sarah, about the plan. Okay, great. So chapter 8, affirmation, about like the plan about what's happening this afternoon. Okay, Iceland. Everything perceivable is regarded as an object by a subject. And yeah, that is in the pure awareness thing, these are valuable narratives. Um, Even if it's also valuable to recognize that it's all just objects interacting with objects. And some of those interactions are so complicated, so amazing that they can be described as beholding, perceiving other objects. Okay, so chapter 8, affirmation, becoming and being a person among persons. So far, we have talked about what we aren't. So far, we have talked more about what we aren't than what we are and how we get to be that way. In these final chapters, we will focus on just what a person is, how persons are constituted, and how we become persons. The discussion will be philosophical, but grounded in what evolutionary theory, social science, and psychology tell us about who and what we are. Persons are poised between the biological, the psychological, and the social, and they live on the cusp of fact and fiction. That's really cute. Exploring the motive reality of persons forces us to confront these two axes of analysis. What, fact and fiction? Discovery and construction? I'm not sure. What are the two axes? This requires us to attend to multiple dimensions of our experience and to reflect on what kinds of beings are produced by and in turn produce the world in which we are embedded. While the discussion may sometimes seem to stray from the topic of the nature of persons opposed to selves, it is worth following the swings and roundabouts, as in the end we will see that it is only by understanding ourselves as persons that we can really understand what it is for life to be meaningful. That's pretty cool. You guys excited? Let us begin by talking about fact and fiction, as some of what I will have to say may call this apparent contrast into question. All right, so move that over a little bit. Oh, and the camera's on, is that all right? Whoa, that's exciting. Are we doing like a romantic couple's birthday celebration? Is that what's going on? What is it? Oh, it's some really nice treat. Is this too good to go? Oh, okay. You're not saying anything. This is just really nice. Great. I'm also excited, Greg. Oh, are you gonna have some of that? Oh, okay. But where's your box? Yeah. All right. Section fact and fiction. As we noted in chapter 3, the words fact and fiction are cognate in English, deriving from the Latin fingere, which means to make. Fact is thus closely related to factory, a place where things are made. Fictions are things we make up. So each term has the connotation of something constructed, something artificial, but nonetheless real in some sense. It is now time to explore with more care the idea that to be fictional is not necessarily to be unreal. Okay, I mean, what artifact is unreal? What artificial thing is also not real? And it's funny because we do conflate those things. And by funny, I mean incredibly frustrating to parts of me anyway. Um, you know, like we are artificial in the sense of, in what sense? I don't know. So what sense is, I'm thinking, let's say a movie scene where there is an AI, a robot or something, and then there's some dumbass character that says that they aren't real. And all of us, not me, but generally we tend to talk about AI as being not real intelligence. But I think that's only because we think of ourselves as, not being these accidental constructions of evolution. And so yeah, we have this intuition of real intelligence as basically being magical, and then if intelligence is mechanistic, if it's composed of mechanisms, well then, it isn't real. But how funny is that? That which is magical is real, and that which is made of real material and mechanisms and evolved in a real known process, it seems fake to us, seems not real. Isn't that, there's definitely something funny there. I may not have articulated that well, or even the idea might not be clear, but there's definitely something funny about that the things that are made, or that, yeah, it's, I guess what it is that the real things are things that are like pre-existing, standing outside of, I don't know, but basically, we seem to see that which is magical as more real than that which is like actual in a lot of ways. Um. Anyway, so that can be that would be an interesting Zoom to have, and I can't wait as this channel builds, to have conversations where we live stream a conversation, open it up to people. It would be limited how many people could, have their mics going. But anyway, we don't need to think about those constraints right now. Very exciting that we're gonna have some dialogues. So I'm gonna maybe discuss this. Um, so there's some kind of a natural compulsion to that magical things, souls, sentience, equals real, but then like constructed things, mechanistic, things of material, less real. There's something about that. And so we'll talk about that in the interview with him on Wednesday. It's coming up fast. Okay. So each term has the connotation of something constructed, something artificial, but nonetheless real in some sense. It is now time to explore with more care the idea that to be fictional is not necessarily to be unreal. As we saw in that context, fictions may constitute facts. Let us consider two kinds of examples of how this comes about before turning more directly to persons. Recall first that in a literary fiction, none of the characters are real outside the scope of the text. But we also saw that although the characters are all manufactured by their authors, to manufacture is to make facts. And sometimes, even in the case of literary fiction, those facts transcend the literary work itself. It is true, for instance, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were executed in Norway, and false that Hamlet was. It is even true that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are characters both in Hamlet and in Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. A fact that Shakespeare could not have created, and a truth he could not have known. Fictional characters, that is, may escape the control of their creators and take on lives of their own. Moreover, even in the case of literary fictions, Moreover, even in the case of literary fictions, there are facts of the matter, and as we noted in Chapter 3, a real difference between truth and falsehood is as good a criterion of reality as any. Again, moreover, even in the case of literary fictions, there are facts of the matter. And as we noted in Chapter 3, a real difference between truth and falsehood is as good a criterion of reality as any. As we noted in Chapter 3, a real difference between truth and falsehood is as good a criterion of reality as any. So reality as a criterion, a thing that has to be true for it. And something that has to be true or fulfilled is there has to be a real difference between truth and falsehood. Okay, maybe that's what that means. I'm not sure. Let us now consider a fiction of a different kind. The fiction that underlies the value of money, an example we introduced earlier in a different context. Consider a $20 banknote and a $1 banknote. The paper and ink that constitute them have no real intrinsic value, and the paper and the ink in the $20 note are certainly not 20 times the value of that in the $1 banknote. The value of each note is entirely manufactured by the United States banking system and the marketplace in which it is accepted. The value of the notes depends upon the willingness of others to accept them in exchange, which depends in turn on what we tell each other about such things. If we stop treating these pieces of paper as valuable, well, they would lose all value. They are effectively characters in a collectively narrated fiction. That fact, however, does not make these banknotes any less valuable, nor does it mean that money in general is any less real. 2 secs. That's fine. Okay, it only reminds us that the reality of banknotes as money is constituted by and has no reality outside of a set of stories we tell. Money and the value of banknotes are not part of the fundamental or primordial world. Yeah, that like it has to be primordial in order to be real. I don't know. Yeah, something. They do not exist prior to our human practices and conventions, awaiting our discovery. We created them. In this respect, they are just like Hamlet, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern. But money and its value, unlike those Shakespearean characters, are definitely real in another sense. Exploring this sense shows us that fictional facticity is not an oxymoron, but rather the mode of existence of many of the entities that constitute our world. It is the mode of existence shared by nations, corporations, clubs, and baseball games. What could be more real than these everyday objects? This is what Buddhist philosophers like Kanjakirti have in mind when they characterize this kind of reality as conventional or samvriti, or as determined by mundane transactions. Lokavyavahara. Mode of existence. What's no mode of existence? Conventional. Is that the same thing? And this is why conventional or mundane transactional existence is not second class existence. In the end, this is what it is to exist at all. To be agreed upon. I mean, even our subject-object duality, as Garfield teaches, is a construction, and as Donald Hoffman teaches. Now, we might not have verbally talked about it and agreed about it and started in some other option, but that doesn't make it any less true that it was kind of just decided. Okay, like, we're subjects, that's an object, there's a difference, space-time is real, bop, bop, bop. I belabor this point because I am trying to convince you that this is the kind of reality that persons enjoy. We are fictional, but also factual. We are brought into existence as persons through the complex interplay between our biology as members of species Homo sapiens and our interactions with one another in the context of the social structures that make persons both possible and necessary. That origin renders us fictional or constructed. It means that our reality as persons is not primordial or independent of human activity. But this tale of origins does not render us unreal. Persons are also factual. We, like the civilizations, cities, and civic practices we create, are real parts of the natural and social world. And we have real biological, psychological, and social properties. This is what genuine empirical reality is. The kind of supernatural reality that would attach to a self is no reality at all. Boom, boom. This is definitely part of what I was trying to get at. Maybe everything, or maybe I was getting confused and trying to get at two things. Genuine, but this is definitely one of them. Genuine empirical reality. Okay? The kind of supernatural reality that would attach to a self is no reality at all. All right, excellent. So, section many levels. To understand what it is to be a person in this sense requires us to understand the complex interplay between the many levels of analysis in which we turn up. It may be tempting to think that these are hierarchical, that biology is the most fundamental and important way to understand our existence, or even the physics and chemistry that might be thought to ground that level. And that all of the other levels at which we understand ourselves are derivative of these physical levels. And yeah, Eros was definitely guilty of that. Eros is learning. Eros is learning. How do you say learning again? Oh, maybe like this. Maybe that's how you do the gerund, those two accents. I forget. Today I'm putting up the things, okay? So it may be tempting to think that these are hierarchical, that biology is the most fundamental and important way to understand our existence, or even the physics and chemistry that might be thought to ground that level, and that all of the other levels at which we understand ourselves are derivative of these physical levels. If you succumb to this temptation, guilty, you might then think that psychology is next, and that it can be ultimately understood as a mere manifestation of our biology, prominently including our neurobiology. And then you might think that the social sciences ride on top of that. Social and behavioral science are, on this view, what you do until the biologist comes and can get a little deeper, get a little more into the real. Absolutely what Eris has mostly subscribed to. And to think this way is to think that persons are fundamentally biological entities. Yes, that's what I thought. And maybe, maybe like right now I'll say that I still think that that is a valuable way, because especially because we have such a strong tendency to not see ourselves as biological entities, that it can be valuable to remind people of the importance of our biology. But then, yes, absolutely, this is the wrong way to look at things and the wrong way to understand our identity as persons. It betrays a faith in reductionism that is not warranted. Before explaining what is wrong with that idea and before offering an alternative, I want to spend a moment on the kernel of truth in it, if only to disarm resistance to an alternative way of seeing things. Yes, baby, disarm me, JG. The kernel of truth is the idea of supervenience. Okay, and what's that? This is a technical term in philosophy, but it is easy to understand. In brief, to say that one level of description, the supervening level, supervenes on another, the base level, is just to say that any two worlds where everything is the same at the base level are also identical at the supervening level. Makes sense. A game of chess, for instance, supervenes on the movements of chess pieces on a board. This just means, this is great. This just means that in any two worlds where the same movements of pieces are made on the chessboard and the same conventions are operative, the same chess games are played. The amount of money in my wallet supervenes on the physical objects in my wallet. Anybody with the same banknotes in their wallet has just as much money as I do. Okay, if they have a 10 and a 20 and I have a 10 and a 20, we have the same amount of money. Okay, if they have 10 ones and a 20 and I have 110 and a 20, we have the same amount of we have we still, the physical objects may be different, but they represent, but I mean also they're not different. No, you wouldn't say that 10 ones and 110 are completely different. There are differences for sure, but it's not saying that all of the objects are identical necessarily, but in some aspect they are identical. And absolutely 110 and 10 ones, but isn't that at the next level? So probably could wrap myself around that a little bit more, but let's keep it moving. So the amount of money in my wallet supervenes on the physical objects in my wallet. Anybody with the same banknotes in their wallet has just as much money as I do. Supervenience in this sense captures the idea that facts at some levels of description determine those at others, even if they don't do so piecemeal, and even if it is impossible to replace one level with another. But the supervenience of chess on the physical is consistent with the fact that that same chess game could have been played online with nothing moving around on a physical board. Chess moves are therefore neither identical with nor reducible to the movements of wooden pieces on a board, even though they may be instantiated by those movements. All right, so let's be precise about what we want to underline here. Okay, nor could we replace a theory of chess with a theory of wooden objects and their movements. The money in my wallet, as we have seen, is neither identical with nor reducible to the banknotes, even though they instantiate it. There are plenty of other ways to have that much money. So, to say that one level of description supervenes on another is not to say that the first is reducible to that other or that it can be replaced, but only that if we fix all the facts at the base level, we would thereby affix all the facts at the supervening level. The kernel of truth in the intuition that the biological is more fundamental than the psychological and that the psychological is more fundamental than the social is that this is the general direction of supervenience relations. Okay. We can accept that idea without thinking that the base levels can ever replace the supervening levels, and without thinking that the base levels explain everything about the supervening levels. You can't use physics to understand a chess game or to understand how money works. You need to know how to play chess to understand a chess game, since it is the same game whether it is played with wooden pieces or online. You need to know some economics to understand money. It can be passed around either as cash or electronically. Most importantly, although a bit harder to see, we need to resist the thought that we can always understand what goes on at the base levels without attention to the supervening levels. All right, I hear you, JG. I hear you. That is some aspects of our biology are driven by our psychology and our social structures. Some aspects of our psychology are driven by our social matrix as well. So to understand who and what we are, all of these levels of description and maybe more are necessary. And this is not a new idea. It was made eloquently by the psychologist Edward Chase Tolman. I would define physiology as a study of the laws determining the activities of muscles and glands. I would define psychology as a study of the laws determining the behavior of whole organisms. And I would define sociology as the study of the laws determining the conduct of groups of organisms. Accepting these definitions, one's first reaction concerning the interrelations of the three sciences would be to think of physiology as the most basic, psychology as the next most basic, and sociology as the least basic, or in other words, to conceive the facts and laws of psychology as dependent upon those of physiology and the facts and laws of sociology as dependent upon those of psychology. But the thesis that I am actually going to try to uphold here is the reverse, and at first sight, a seemingly absurd one, to wit, that the facts and laws of psychology are rather, in some part, dependent upon those of sociology, and that the facts and laws of physiology are similarly, in some part, dependent upon those of psychology. We are an ultra social species. We are genetically programmed for social interactions of all kinds, including parent child interactions, language learning, friendship, etc. There's nothing controversial about this. Now, let us think about the impact of this ultra sociality on who we have become. That sociality has allowed us to evolve into language users, into beings who construct and inhabit complex societies with intricate political, economic, and social structures. That is, over hundreds of generations, we have collectively engineered the niche we inhabit. That niche, in turn, constitutes the context in which we are selected and in which we evolve, and the context in which our psychology is shaped. So, for instance, once the broad outlines of our linguistic, sociopolitical, and economic regime are in place, our psychology responds to those demands. We learn to think and even to introspect, and so to know ourselves in the languages we speak. The metaphor, semantic distinctions, and even the syntax and orthography of our languages shape our thought and our perception of the world, including what color distinctions we draw or how we experience and understand time. Excellent. And this definitely coincides, aligns really nicely with some of the thoughts that visited us last night about, yeah, about just how constrained we are by our subscription, our narrative, our main, let's say, subscription, cultural subscription, like this is what's right. Like, I'm starting to hate. Okay, let me take that back. There's a part of me that is becoming increasingly frustrated when I see this, when I just like see people who don't dare to do anything with their hair and like never really have. Um, just like and it's just like, don't you see that? Wouldn't the world be so much more beautiful if it wasn't that everybody was doing this in this era, this decade? And then, and then we all do something, we all do the same thing in some other era, some new same thing, you know? So, a dread mullet, hell yeah, right? Shake it up, bro, please. I mean, it just feels like we're really doing ourselves a disservice by, you know, constraining ourselves so much. This is the way to do things. And I mean, it's obvious, but it isn't obvious, right? We don't spend enough time appreciating that fact, you know, trying to stretch out, follow your instinct. I think that everybody has a moral obligation to do what they care about. And if that means that we have no food, because let's suppose that not enough people enjoyed, gardening and planting and working a farm and so on. Okay, okay. But I think it is more important to happiness to do as you feel to do than to eat. Because let's say you don't eat. All right, well, first of all, you're going to be euphoric. There are going to be times when you are euphoric during that. Let's say you just stop eating. And then after that, you're going to die. And you're not going to be unhappy, bro. So that's my case for what I was thinking last night, that every person has a moral obligation to do what makes them happy, to do what they care about, and to show other people that they too can do that. Um, and I, I believe that there are people who enjoy, who get pleasure out of doing things for other people. I don't want to toot my own horn here, but that is how I see what I am doing. That I'm making this sacrifice of not going and getting a 9 to 5. I mean, also I would be miserable, but yeah, of like having to, having these worries about money, um, and I'm just staying focused on trying to be a channel for, I mean, like a channel, and then also a channel for information that can boost, happiness, utility. Okay, great. Moving on. So so why did I flip back to this? Because I want to underline, more importantly, although a bit harder to see, we need to resist the thought that we can always understand what goes on at the base levels without paying attention. um okay, great. So we were saying that the metaphors, the semantic distinctions, and even the syntax and orthography of our languages shape our thought and our perception of the world, including what color distinctions we draw and how we experience and understand time, and what we think we're allowed to do, and what instincts we stifle, and then have to take Prozac because we just kept stifling all of our instincts. And that's what happens when you don't follow your instincts. Mother Nature programmed us to heed our instincts. And when you don't heed your instincts, I'm not saying that all of the instincts that Mother Nature programmed us with, especially given that she programmed us with those instincts in one environment and now we're in a different one. So I'm not saying that they're all good instincts. But I am saying that when you just try to stifle your instincts, suppress your instincts, and do what is prescribed, there's a major cost. There is a major risk because there are systems in place that if you're not listening to yourself enough, if you're not pursuing your needs and desires enough, that you're going to be depressed. Of course, one must do what one deems necessary. Only you possess the knowledge of what is most suitable. Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't think that I possess the knowledge of what is most suitable, but I we're kind of the closest to, but yes. No, I accept absolutely that sentence. Even if, I just want to change the word from no to we feel most intimately our own desires, especially when we sort of let ourselves, when we're not distracted by the prescribed narrative. So yeah, that's what it is. Only you possess, not that knowledge is active necessarily, not that you can be described to know, but only you contains that knowledge, even if you haven't found it. So absolutely, Ohm said, one must do what one deems necessary, and only that one possesses the knowledge of what is most suitable to that one. And yeah, total endorsement from me. And my reluctance, my hesitation, my rejection was because I was interpreting possessing knowledge as like actively handling that knowledge. Okay. So the political and economic conditions that determine social success or failure, the material conditions of the work we do, and the spaces we inhabit also shape our preferences. These conditions also determine what is salient to us in our environment, our range of options for action. Yeah, bro. Yeah, bro. Oh, the range is so much. The range is so much wider for what you can do with your body, what you can do with your thoughts, with your time, than we think that it is. And what you can do with your hair, what information we acquire, and how we deploy that information in reasoning and in planning our lives. Let me read that again. These conditions also determine what is salient to us in our environment, our range of options for action, what information we acquire, and how we deploy that information in reasoning and in planning our lives. In short, how we think, what our goals are, how we behave, and what gives us pleasure and pain are to a large part determined by our social context. It is therefore impossible to understand who we are psychologically without understanding who we are socially. Tolman offers the example of, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. I'm just thinking about I gotta make shorts and even just like running this OBS. Hopefully we get enough followers where we can expand the team so that I don't have to like keep glancing at and make sure that I'm in frame and all that stuff. And that I don't have to make shorts. I can just keep working on this and someone else can work on the shorts. So these conditions also blah, blah. In short, how we think, what our goals are, how we behave, and what gives us pleasure and pain are to a large part determined by our social context. And again, that's obvious in some ways, but it's not obvious in the sense that it's a piece of information that has as much influence on our thinking as it should. It is therefore impossible to understand who we are psychologically without understanding who we are socially. Okay, absolutely convinced, bro. Absolutely convinced. I mean, maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit, but that's okay. It's okay. I just get such joy out of changing my mind that even if I thought that before, I'm going to focus on the fact that I feel like I'm learning it now. Tolman offers the example of trying to understand the behavior, and we might add the affect and thought, of a bridegroom at his wedding. The bridegroom will do many things, feel many things, and think many thoughts. Most of those actions and psychological states will reflect in some way the social construction of marriage and the marriage ceremony in his culture, the views and practices of his family or of his co religionists, etc., and perhaps his own social and economic standing. It is impossible to predict, to explain, or to understand his psychology without understanding the social context in which he plays the role, the persona of a bridegroom, and his larger role, the person he is, in the social drama in which he is embedded. His physical behavior, say slipping a ring on a woman's finger, can only be explained psychologically and socially. His physical expression of emotion makes sense only in the context of a culture that thematizes romantic love. Once one sees this point, one sees that this is true regarding almost all of our psychology. The lines we speak, the gestures we make, the lives we lead are structured in part by the roles we play and the social structures that define those roles and make them possible. Of course, there are also important biological constraints on our thought and behavior. One can only perform on the stage. Hold on, let me try this real quick. Great. Now just keep me there, bro. Of course, there are also important biological constraints on our thought and behavior. One can only perform on the stage that one can only perform on the stage what one is biologically capable of doing. Our sensory apparatus, nervous system, and musculature help to explain how we see, move, and interact with one another. These constraints are independent of, but interact with, the stage directions an actor receives and the script they follow. But these factors are not sufficient to explain what the actor does. To provide a complete explanation, one must refer to the play in which he is performing, the director's conception of the play, the culture of the theater, etc. Similarly, the bride. And then, do you also need to include the reception? Is that in the etc.? Or is that outside of what we're talking about? Similarly, the bridegroom's behavior is constrained by and partly explained by his biology, and biology interacts with social variables to determine how he perceives, moves, and reacts. Despite this fact, his biology is still insufficient to explain much of what transpires at his wedding. A lot of biography and social theory is necessary as well. Moreover, even our biological nature and processes can often be understood only with reference to our psychology and social context. The bridegroom may sweat or shake, his blood pressure may rise, his pupils may contract. To be sure, these are biological processes, each of which can be explained in some sense by appealing to straightforwardly biological causes. To be sure, these are biological processes, each of which can be explained in some sense by appealing to straightforwardly biological causes. Nonetheless, we see in an instant that to explain or to understand these processes, we must appeal both to the bridegroom's psychology and to the social structures that generate his anxiety and excitement. Biology alone would tell us very little about what is going on. So, we therefore need the social level of explanation even to understand the biological facts on which that social level supervenes. The explanation and understanding of the behavior of persons are two-way streets. And yeah, let me just re-emphasize for myself, because there's a thought creeping up like, but doesn't this like all appear in the biology? Yeah, but it's not understandable by only considering the biology. And this is where his comment about the supervening levels and stuff is important. That Like it's not reducible, he says, to biology, but it still supervenes the biology. Very good. And then of course part of this is in how we can understand things. Um, and a lot, and I'm realizing more and more of these discussions, these ideas, these concepts are about how we can conceptualize things and less about what reality is. So, we therefore need the social level of explanation even to understand the biological effects on which that social level supervenes. Yes, and that's a great sentence. Right. I think I was a little bit distracted because I said like so right before I read that. And so I was thinking, okay, here's a thought I'm gonna share. But there it is, bro. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, because who is this agent of understanding? Yeah. How do you say understanding? Okay, very good. Or I don't need to say person, I'll just say put the agent symbol under understand to be the understander. The explanation and understanding of the behavior of persons are two-way streets. There is an evolutionary point here as well. As biological organisms, we are subject to selection pressures. Each of us exists only because our parents survived to reproduce. The fact that we lived to adulthood, perhaps to reproduce ourselves, required that many others in our community survived as well and were willing to cooperate with us. Those who do survive pass the genes that enable them to do so to their offspring. The social and psychological complexity of the niche we inhabit, a niche that can only be understood in those social and psychological terms, guarantees that those who are socially and psychologically successful, those who play well with others, will have better reproductive outcomes. So, the genes that determine who we are biologically are subject to social and psychological selection pressures. And that means that even to understand our biology, we must understand our social context. We thus see that to grant the supervenience of the social and psychological levels on the biological is not to claim that the biological level has any privileged explanatory role, still less that we can dispense with higher levels of analysis in favor of more fundamental levels. No, we can only understand persons if we take a multidimensional perspective that takes all of these levels of description and their complex interactions into account. One way to put this is to say that we are biologically determined to create social structures that provide the context in which we develop psychologically. Our psychology, in turn, helps to elaborate these social structures, which in turn shape our psychology. This complex psychological and social environment and then of course our biology, right? Because your the connections, the synapses are changing, right? Where there are synapses. So the synapses themselves are like strengthening and weakening, and then the arrangement's changing. New synapses are forming, you know, or vanishing. Um, and that's biology. Yeah. Great. So I don't know whether I'm just being a little bit resistant or whether this is just, what happens when you have a science perspective. I don't know. Okay. So our psychology, in turn, helps to elaborate these social structures, which in turn shape our psychology. And then this complex psychological and social environment, in turn, helps to determine our biological heritage, as well as its expression in concrete situations. Oh yeah, same page, bro. Well, different page. Same book, bro. No. Anyway, persons emerge from this looping, spiraling interaction between variables at each of these levels of description. Okay? Persons emerge from this looping, spiraling interaction between variables at each of these levels of interaction. None can be ignored if we want to understand who we are. Let us now turn to some of the specific ways that we emerge as persons. So, section Becoming Persons. We are born helpless, in need of care, and we are biologically endowed with the resources to seek, to stimulate, and to accept that care. This is a commonplace. But the impact on how we emerge as persons is profound. It means that we come to understand ourselves as persons and to manifest that personhood not through an immediate first-person awareness of ourselves, as one might expect were we selves, but rather through our awareness of and our recognition by second persons. The contemporary British developmental psychologist Vasudevi Reddy has explored this aspect of our cognitive and affective development in great depth. Her empirical work and her reflection on that work provide compelling evidence regarding how early human infants recognize second persons and how central that recognition is not only to their later recognition of third persons, but more importantly to their own self-conception as first persons. I think I'm going to have to read that again. So, we are born helpless, in need of care, and we are biologically endowed with the resources to seek, to stimulate, and to accept that care. This is a commonplace. But the impact on how we emerge as persons, is profound. It means that we come to understand ourselves as persons and to manifest that personhood not through an immediate first-person awareness of ourselves, as one might expect were we selves, but rather through our awareness of and our recognition by second persons. Bro. The contemporary British developmental psychologist Vasudevi Reddy has explored this aspect of our cognitive and affective development in great depth. Her empirical work and her reflection on that work provide compelling evidence regarding how early human infants recognize second persons and how central that recognition is not only to their later recognition of third persons, but more importantly, to their own self-conception as first persons. Yeah. Ohm says, please consider this analogy. You are the dreamer, the dream world, and the characters within the dream. The world may seem real, yet it is merely a projection of, I'm going to say, but it's merely an instantiation of the psychophysical processes. Ohm has gone with, yet it is merely a projection of consciousness or self. But of course, as we're learning in this book, and in other books, consciousness and self are themselves sort of characters, concepts, constructs, and they are projections of the psychophysical processes embedded in the social environment. Sweet. Awesome. Yes, absolutely. I think that is a great analogy. So Reddy asks, what does it take to be aware that someone is attending to you? This apparently simple question raises two others that are essential to understanding how we come to be persons. First, what does it take to recognize another's attention? Second, what does it take to recognize oneself as the object of that attention? Oh, this is getting exciting. Reddy begins to answer these questions when she says, the awareness of self as the object of others' attention must lead to, rather than result from, representations of self and other psychological entities. Wow. So what does it take to be aware that someone's attending to you? Well, first, what does it take to recognize another's attention? Okay, so we'll put that like that. And then second, what does it take to recognize oneself as the object of that attention. Okay, great. So Reddy begins to answer these questions when she says, the awareness of self as the object of others' attention must lead to, rather than result from, representations of self and other as psychological entities. So, I am an object being beheld by a subject. Okay, I am something. I am this object. Okay. Rather than, hey, I am something, I am this object. Oh, and because I've established that, I can recognize that someone is aware of me. I think that's the idea. Helen Keller, in one of the other self-illusion books I read, Helen Keller is reported as having communicated that she had no sense of self before learning language. And it can be explained in this frame here, before she could be, because I thought it was just about the language thing, but maybe it's about the interaction thing, about the attending thing. So before she had language, these were just like sensory stimulations without sort of complicated communication, right? And the more complicated the communication got by introducing language, the more attended to she felt. She felt like she knew their intentions to attend to her. Anyway, I think it could definitely be an ingredient, a part of it. I think this was in the self-illusion, how the social brain creates identity, saying that, we need these, like, to think of ourselves as selves, so that there's, like, one thing that's relating to those other objects around us. But this could also be an aspect of it, this being attended to chain of first being a second person, and then second becoming a first person. Yeah. Okay. This perspective presumes what one might call a second person approach to the developing awareness of self and other. That is, our awareness of ourselves as subjects dawns with our awareness. Our awareness of ourselves as subjects dawns with our awareness of those who address us and whom we address. In other words, the first person and the second person are co-emergent. We cannot understand our own self-consciousness without understanding its emergence through our consciousness of others. We cannot understand our own self-consciousness without understanding its emergence through our consciousness of others. Oh, not we cannot establish. Maybe. Because that's kind of the point from earlier, but this feels a little bit different. When he says we, it means people in general, like we as in him and the reader and anybody involved in this investigation of self-consciousness in general. Nobody says we cannot understand our own self-consciousness without understanding its emergence through our consciousness of others. Anyway, same point being made. I don't know what felt different. All right, very good. Reddy provides evidence. I am going to note that I'm not sure that I feel confident in my understanding of that. Your body is a temporary appearance inside you. Consciousness, says Om. You are not the object, you are the subject in which the object exists. Yeah, or there's no such thing as subjects. But that is definitely a good narrative, and that's really one thing that I was really understanding last night, that is a valuable narrative, that I am a subject, a container of objects. But also, it can also be valuable to really see yourself as, constituted by only objects. You are the awareness witnessing the body, says Om, not the body itself. If you can observe your body, you are not it. Not this, not that. Neti neti. That's right. Yeah. Unless, of course, if I were able to go like this and my eyes were more protruded, we talked about this in a previous live stream, and there wasn't this bridge. Okay, suppose all of that, then I could be an object, beholding another object, beholding that first object, be both this and that. But I can't look at my eyeball. But yeah, that made my trip amazing last night, thinking of being pure awareness and just witnessing. Now, you know, my concern is that when you are you okay, buddy? Ah, okay, okay. Let's see how many more pages I have. Oh, not many, bro. Like 4 or 5, bro. So we'll figure it out. Beautiful snow. My concern is that if we just think of ourselves as pure awareness, maybe we're less motivated to know the psychophysical processes that instantiate us, that constitute us. Yeah, that's my response to that. Does that make sense? I'll type that in actually. That is such a valuable narrative. My concern is that if it is our only narrative, that we are awareness, that we are just awareness rather than also physical processes, then we are less motivated to learn about those psychophysical processes that definitely instantiate or constitute us. So it is definitely valuable to see yourself as the witness. It is also valuable and that's what it is. So Om says, you are the witness, not the body. You observe it. Era says, yes. On the other hand, there is also value in seeing yourself as the body, brain. To know your awareness, to understand your awareness, to know what about your awareness is reliable, you must learn about the way brains perceive and interpret. Awesome. Awesome. Very proud of that. Thank you to all the people who have taught me that stuff. Okay, so Reddy provides evidence for this co-emergence through observation of infant-parent interactions in the first 2 years of life. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Should I? Oops, nope. Wonder whether I should, do I I move the chat over here, is that crazy? What if I... Maybe that is crazy, huh? What if it goes here? No. Make it smaller. I don't know. I'll look back later and see what that looks like. Okie dokie. So, Reddy provides evidence for this co-emergence through observation of infant-parent interactions in the first 2 years of life. By age 2 to 4 months, infants respond to another's gaze with pleasure or fear and attempt to engage attention and gaze. By 2 to 4 months, infants respond to another's gaze with pleasure or fear and attempt to engage attention and gaze. By 6 to 8 months, they monitor the gaze of others and orient their own gaze in response. Importantly, this monitoring, she argues, includes affective awareness. Okay, so awareness of the emotions, the affect. Okay, cool. As early as 2 months of age, she shows infants exhibit coyness, embarrassment, pride, and pleasure and respond to the affective states of those with whom they interact. The affective and the cognitive co-emerge and do so essentially in these dyadic contexts. Dyadic. What's that mean, bro? Dyadic. Oh yeah, just the interaction between two things, okay. Om says, Advaita Vedanta posits that only the self, which is you, exists beyond the confines of space and time, yet remains immanent within it, and the entirety of the world manifests within this framework. Yes. Posited. Heard. Yes. But there are dangers to seeing ourselves as being that magical. But there is also a value. It really depends on the context. So I definitely I'm being a truth pluralist for sure. That's how I'm feeling right now. In short, the emergence of subjectivity, so the affective and the cognitive co-emerge, and do so essentially in these dyadic contexts. What does that mean? The affective and the cognitive co-emerge, and they emerge in their cooperation. I'm not sure what is meant by essentially. I'm not sure what this means. In short, the emergence of subjectivity is inextricably bound up with the recognition of another's attention and mood, and so with the primitive awareness of oneself as the object of another subject. The second person is hence inextricably bound up with the first. Reddy also argues that early dyadic infant-parent interactions involve the spontaneous perception of action as intentional, and that these interactions are often dialogical, and so involve the explicit representation of subjective difference between the participants. Reddy also argues that early dyadic infant-parent interactions... Oh, it's dyadic. It's not about affective cognitive. It's about first person, second person, or the me and the them, and the you. Reddy also argues that early dyadic infant-parent interactions involve the spontaneous perception of action as intentional. Yeah, which is definitely a pre-programmed thing. We are so ready to look at any action from another person as intentional. But I want to like help with that. Sarah, I want to help with that, but I guess you're doing it because you want to warm something up right now. Because hearing you all exasperated and stuff when I know I would get pleasure out of helping isn't making sense to me. But do you want to, is it like, are you enjoying the struggle? Oh, okay. So I was telling you about how I just have a few pages left. Are you bored? A head start on it. Yeah, and you're doing a great job of that. So don't feel pressured to finish it. Just get a good head start on it. Yeah. Okay. So I think yeah. Well, you went for a head start and that's great. So should we like not risk breaking any more things and just wait until I can take a look at it with you and we can put our minds together for it? That's a great idea, buddy. So, Reddy also argues that early dyadic infant parent interactions involve the spontaneous perception of action as intentional, and that these interactions are often dialogical and so involve the explicit representation of subjective difference between the participants. Infants and caregivers, that is to say, are explicitly exchanging information in these interactions. Each is cognizant both of what she has to communicate and of the knowledge and ignorance of the other. This is important because it shows that even before they master language, infants represent the difference in perspective between themselves and those with whom they interact and the distinct roles each takes in dyadic interactions. The implications of this awareness of difference for the development of personhood are profound. Great. Okay, now let's read that first sentence again. I think we do understand it now that we've read the whole paragraph. Alrighty then. Beep 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 beep. Reddy also argues that early dyadic infant-parent interactions involve the spontaneous perception of action as intentional, and that these interactions are often dialogical and so involve the explicit representation of subjective difference between participants. You have your subjectivity, I have my subjectivity. Got you, got you, got you, got you. Yes, yes, absolutely. Same page again. It's not required. It's not required. She didn't need to be working on the microwave right now. Ohm says, please provide assistance as required. It's always good to help. And I agree. And that's why I interrupted her and I was like, hey, let me help you, bro. I can't help right now. I need to finish the chapter, but that doesn't need to be done right now. And that's what I was asking. Because if it needed to be done, then okay, great. I will, hard to imagine that it could need to be done right now. I'm not sure what I would have done if it needed to be done right now. So this is important because it shows that even Boba infants interact with their caregivers not through language, but through non-linguistic actions. Those actions, whether playful or protesting, even though they are nonverbal, are interpreted. And when we interpret somebody as meaning something, we are on the way to taking them to be a person. A parent reaches for an infant and the infant prepares her body to be lifted. She interprets the gesture as a reaching for her. Okay. Not just, okay, arms moving close. No. But then you can also infer that there is an intention, a goal, that where it's going to end up. Or just like arms moving. Now closer. Okay, yeah, they're closer because they're coming towards you. They're reaching for her. Okay. A parent plays peekaboo and the infant interprets the covering and revealing of the face as an enticement to play. The infant makes facial expressions or gestures to attract the attention of the caregiver or to engage him in interaction. The infant is hence immediately attributing intentionality, interest, and subjectivity to the other, taking the second person to be a person capable of experiencing her own actions and with intentions of his own. So that second person's a subject, beholding me an object. I guess I'm also a subject, beholding that object. Boom. This recognition of the difference between oneself and another is very important. It is part of the foundation of our development as persons and our recognition of ourselves and of others as occupants of roles. For these interactions are not only dyadic, they are dialogical, with each participant taking a different role. The infant recognizes the difference in perspective, in intention, and in capacity of the second person. Subjectivity is hence understood from the beginning of human life not as uniform, but as varying from person to person. The infant's own subjective states, intentions, and experiences are not simply projected onto the dialogical partner, they are differentiated from them. That is, early in life, infants come to understand that minds constitute a multiplicity with many different instances. Of course, they may understand that, but then still, it's not until they're like 4 years old that they understand the detail or start to understand the details of that or how to use that. And so you still see 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds failing theory of mind, exercises or experiments or tests. Okay, so that is early in life, infants come to understand. So yeah, these theory of minds experiments haven't shown when theory of mind in the sense of just like knowledge that other subjects have different subjectivity first develops, but they're showing when brains tend to be able to like use that information or just like develop it more. So you could say that like the brain who leaves the room, no, the brain who stays in the room, who moves the ball. Okay, so you have a theory of mind experiment. Like, what object do I want to use? All right, here we go. So you have we have one object. Okay. So this object is gonna go, okay, hold on. Okay, that object is hidden under that note card. Okay, and my friend here, right here, sees that. Okay, now friend, go away, hold on. Okay, hey friend, come back. Oh, what's that, experimenter? You have a question for me? Oh, where is my friend gonna look? I know their subjectivity is different, but yeah, that hasn't really developed enough for me to really think about where they would look. So I'm gonna go with where I would look, and I would look here because I moved it here. Okay, now a 6-year-old. Oh, well, I've known for a long time that other subjects have different subjectivity, and my networks have further developed so that, my theory of mind is further developed. So I now have like processes, protocols to kind of recall what information that last person had and stuff, and apply that information, integrate that with my theory of mind. So I'm gonna say that they didn't see me move it, so they're probably gonna look here. Okay, great. So Reddy draws these insights together into a comprehensive account of the origins of social cognition in the second person perspective. She writes, the typical development of social cognition originates in second person engagements that irresistibly involve the infant, changing not only the infant cognizer's capacity to cognize, but also that which develops to be cognized. The emotional involvement of persons, in particular those most salient of emotional involvement. What? All right, let's read this again. The typical development of social cognition originates in second person engagements that irresistibly involve the infant, and they change not only the infant cognizer's capacity to cognize, but also that which develops to be cognized. Okay. So not only the processing, but what is going to be inputs considered by those processes. Is that right? The emotional involvement of persons, in particular those persons who are most salient. No, the emotional involvement of persons, in particular those most salient of emotional involvements, that occur in second person engagements where the infant is directly addressed or responded to by another, becomes the crucible of cognition. So the emotional involvement of persons becomes the crucible of cognition. But if cognition and affective maturation begin in early childhood, second person interaction, this second person does not lose importance once one becomes explicitly aware of third persons and of oneself as part of a community of second and third persons. Second persons remain important, Reddy emphasizes, through adulthood. She continues. But if cognition and affective maturation begin in early childhood, second person interaction, the second person does not lose importance once one becomes explicitly aware of third persons and of oneself as part of a community of second and third persons. Second persons remain important. Reddy emphasizes through adulthood. She continues. Both types of experiences, second person involvements and third person observations, must influence each other, and both may be necessary, even for stable pre-inferential perception of other minds. But being addressed as a you, and that's what I was trying to say with the theory of mind, but still the mechanisms of inference based on that theory of mind are still developing. But being addressed as a you, and continue developing, throughout your development. But being addressed as a you and addressing the other as a you arouses emotional responses differently from watching someone else being addressed, and engenders, even if briefly, a mutuality and suspension of separateness. Okay. You bop bop bop. And you say you bop bop bop. Okay. Yeah, there's something there that I can't wrap my mind around immediately. So I'm excited to let that bounce around in here. Very interesting. So the other becomes a person to you, someone who knocks you off balance or enters your consciousness in a more fundamental way than when you are largely untouched by the other or just watching them when they're just third persons. Okay. We respond in special ways, with distinct neurosignatures to being addressed by our names or even as you, and our affective arousal is higher when in dyadic interactions than when observing others. We not only become who we are in early second-person interactions, but we manifest who we are in these interactions in maturity. This engagement requires a complex, co-constituted, intentional situation. First, we must be open to engage with others. To be open in this sense is to see others as persons, as subjects in their own right. Sonder. We do not address trees or tables as you, only persons, and address presupposes the possibility of uptake, of reception. But this is not enough. To address another as a second person presupposes that the addresser recognizes the addressee as a person. Right? I thought you just said that. We do not address trees, but only persons. And address presupposes the possibility of uptake. But this is not enough. To address another as a second person presupposes that the addresser recognizes the addressee as a person. I don't understand the difference between these things. Just as I do not address them, I do not take myself to be addressed by the sound of... Just as I do not address them, I do not take myself to be addressed by the sound of the surf or thunder or by birds. Address requires that I find myself in a dyad, not only in which I recognize the other's personhood, but in which I am also respected by the other as a person. Yes, I think it's supposed to be the addressee recognizes the addresser. That's what I think. Okay. But there is a higher level requirement as well. If I am truly to address you, whether as an infant or as an adult, I have to be able to recognize the fact that you recognize me. This is like the third time, or the second time. And I must suppose that we each recognize this reciprocity. And here's the third thing. Okay. And I must suppose that we each recognize this reciprocity. Okay, so first, address presupposes the possibility of uptake. Also, the addressee has to recognize the addressor as a person. And then also we have to suppose that we both recognize this reciprocity. Okie dokie. So let's say 1, 2, 3. Okay. If I do not recognize this complex relationship, then even if you might take me to be addressing you, I cannot take myself to be doing so. Second person recognition, even in infancy, is hence an act of higher order cognition in which I take you to take me as someone whose messages are worthy of uptake. I take you to take me as someone whose messages are worthy of uptake. But at the same time, to do so is to see myself as just such a being. All of this shows that first-person awareness of ourselves as subjects is hence possible in the context of second-person relations. This context constitutes the two-way street on which we members of species Homo sapiens can come to lead lives as persons. This developmental story is important because it demonstrates just how co-constituted our subjectivity is. We may take ourselves naively to be independent subjects who accidentally discover others. We may take our access to our own minds to be more fundamental than our access to others. We may take association to be somehow accidental or optional, but in each case, we are wrong to do so. We become persons through our interactions with other persons, and as persons, we fully manifest who we are only in such interactions. The fact that as persons we lack independent selves and that our personhood is brought into existence as we learn our roles in interaction with others, hence does not reduce us to non-existence, but rather explains how beings like us can come to be in the first place. To regard ourselves as selfless persons is not to denigrate, but to make sense of our reality and to recognize that our lives are only possible and can only have meaning in the context of a world. We turn in the next chapter to a discussion of how it is that we construct lives as persons and find those lives meaningful in the absence of any self. So we're going to do chapter 9, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Chapter 9, being in the world, living as a person. Today, I'll see you all in